Welcome to you, Howard Grief. Israel, in the news, in the debates globally, is very often referred to be an occupying force, an occupying state. Is this correct?
This is another falsehood. First, I would like to say thank you for the opportunity for inviting me to the studio to speak on behalf of Israel's legal case, which I consider to be an ironclad legal case. There is no such thing as occupied territories for Israel. This is the greatest hoax and myth of the last part of the 20th century and now in the 21st century. The territories which are described as occupied were part and parcel of the Jewish national home that was allotted to the Jewish people in 1920 in a boundary agreement that France and Great Britain concluded on December 23, 1920. And Judea, Samaria, and Gaza were included in the territory of Palestine, which was synonymous with the Jewish national home. Therefore, any area of the Jewish national home is Jewish designated land. It is not Arab land. It is not occupied land. What does occupied mean? It means that it belongs to a foreign sovereign. And under the Fourth Geneva Convention, there was no foreign sovereign. Actually, it's Articles 42 and 43 of the Hague Regulations of 1907 requires that in order for occupation to take place, there must be a foreign sovereign. Now, who was the foreign sovereign? Jordan was not a legitimate foreign sovereign. No one recognized their sovereignty over Judea, Samaria, and eastern Jerusalem, except Pakistan and partly Great Britain. And in any case, from a technical viewpoint, it cannot be occupied territories, but from a substantive viewpoint, it's altogether fallacious and actually ridiculous because this land, as I repeat, was allotted to the Jewish national home, to the Jewish people. And Jews were entitled to settle anywhere in Judea and Samaria and all over the land of Israel.
People say that this is the Palestinian territories. Has it ever been under the Palestinian sovereignty?
Well, when the distribution of the Ottoman Empire provinces in the Middle East was distributed by the principal Allied powers, Britain, France, Italy, and Japan, there was no nation called Palestinians. So it's complete falsification of what took place. I can only repeat myself again, this land was allotted to the Jewish people, so that therefore there was no Palestinians who were given this land. Furthermore, the Arabs who have changed their name to Palestinians is another myth, because the Jews were the Palestinians all during the Mandate period, which extended from 1920 to 1948. The Arabs, who now rebrand themselves as Palestinians, they rejected this term. They said, we're part of independent Syria. We're South Syrians. Their leaders, such as Ahmed Shkulkari, said this specifically as late as the 1950s. They rejected the term. As late as 1967, when UN Resolution 242 was adopted by the UN Security Council, they were not called Palestinians. They were called simply refugees. Apparently, sometime in 1969, the United Nations adopted the term Palestinians. But this is, again, a falsification of history, because the Jewish people were known as the Palestinians all during the first half of the 20th century.
It is referred to 1947, the year when Israel was established, or the legality of Israel was founded. Is this correct?
No, this is incorrect. Again, the whole political and diplomatic and legal history has been forgotten, has been erased, because people start from 1967 or at best 1948. The United Nations did not create the Jewish state. This is another misconception. The Jewish state theoretically came into being with the adoption of the San Remo Resolution in April 1920. The thing is, though, the Jews did not govern Palestine. It was given over to Great Britain, who was given the administration of Palestine. But in 1920, the land was allotted to the Jewish people, and Britain, as the mandatory and as the trustee and as the tutor, were supposed to guide the Jewish people into eventual independence. This was the idea behind the Balfour Declaration and the San Remo Resolution of April 25, 1920. The Jewish state could have come into being at any time between I'm talking about an independent Jewish state, at any time before 1948. There was only one condition that needed to be fulfilled. That was the Jews were supposed to become a majority of the population. Now, that is the reason why Article 6 of the mandate was made part of the mandate, to allow the Jews to come en masse to Palestine. But what happened is the British actually sabotaged Article 6. They put all kinds of restrictions on Jews entering Palestine, and they had no right to do so. Jews were supposed to come freely to what was called their national home. And if that had been the case, Jews would have formed the majority of the country, but Britain stood in the way. Britain was supposed to be the mandatory and the trustee to bring this about. Instead, they were the obstacle. And therefore, the Jewish state did not come in, the independent Jewish state did not come into existence until 1948. But it could have come into existence sooner had the British fulfilled their obligations under the mandate.
Exactly when did it become binding international law that this region, these territories, this area was going to be a part of the Jewish nation?
Okay, the answer to this question is twofold. The answer comes in 1919 and 1920. In 1919, the representatives of the victorious Principal, Allied, and Associated Powers met in Paris at the Paris Peace Conference. There, they adopted the covenant of the League of Nations, which was the covenant was the achievement of President Woodrow Wilson, but Article 22 of the covenant, which dealt with the mandate system, was the achievement of General Jan Christian Smuts, a South African statesman who was a member of the Imperial War Cabinet of David Lloyd George. And it was General Smuts, it was General Smuts, who later became Prime Minister of South Africa. It was he who devised the mandate system. And he was also one of the framers of the Balfour Declaration. And he listed 6 countries that would come under the mandate. One of them was Palestine. In 1919, Palestine did not mean Arab Palestine, it meant Jewish Palestine. The evidence for that is the agreement that was concluded between Emil Faisal, who represented the Arab National Movement, and Chaim Weizmann, who represented the Zionist movement. They concluded an agreement on January the January 3, 1919, and the agreement envisaged both an Arab and a Jewish state with borders separating them. And that was January the 3. On January the 30th of that same month, the contribution made by General Smuts was adopted by the Supreme Council of the Principal Allied Powers. And that put in force the mandate system. And under that system, Palestine was to be tutored into independence by an advanced nation. That was, as I say, 1919. Already we know that Palestine did not officially exist in 1919. It was a concept, just as Syria and Iraq and Arabia, for that matter, were concepts. There were no borders yet. Then, a year later, the same principal Allied powers, minus the United States, because the United States had not declared war against Turkey, they were the associated power. They were involved in the approving the mandate system in 1919. But in 1920, it was then decided to distribute the Middle Eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire. And that was done at the San Remo Peace Conference. It began on April 18th and ended on April 26, 1920. 2 days were devoted to Palestine. Those sessions were held on the 24th and 25th of April, and it is there where they adopted what I have called the San Remo Resolution, distributing the territories to the national beneficiaries of the mandate. Iraq went to the Arab side, Syria went to the Arab side, but Palestine did not go to the local Arabs of Palestine. It went to the Jews of the world, to the Jewish people, to world Jewry. This was the unique identity of the Palestine Mandate. Other mandates were given over to the local inhabitants, but not in the case of Palestine. In 1920, the Jews were 80,000 only, and the Arabs far outnumbered them. But this was the unique feature of the Palestine Mandate. It was designated for the Jewish national home, for the Jewish world, for the Jewish people, for those Jews who would eventually emigrate to Palestine and become the majority. That was the idea of Lord Arthur James Balfour, the Foreign Secretary of Britain, and David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, and that was adopted at the San Remo Peace Conference by France, who were represented by its Prime Minister, Alexander Millerand, and its Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Philip Berthelot, and the Italian Prime Minister, Francesco Nitti, as well as the Japanese Ambassador, Mitsui.
So what you say is that even the Arabic states was established during this period, because in the Western world, it's one of the accusation against Israel is that Israel is a result of Western colonialism. But the case is that also the Arab states were established during this period.
Yes, this is very important to know. Prior to 1916, there were no Arab states for many, many centuries. Perhaps the last Arab state as such was in Fatimid Egypt, going back to the medieval period. That was a long time ago. There was no Arab state called Iraq, there was no Arab state called Syria, and there was no Arab state called Palestine. All these states were created by the same document, which I have called the San Remo Resolution. And why should the Arabs condemn the Jews for getting their state when they got this, their own states under the same, from the same document, from the same origin. It's so hypocritical on their part to talk about colonialism when they were the greatest benefactors of what the principal Allied powers did. The principal Allied powers, particularly Britain and France, lost millions of soldiers who were killed in World War I, and the Arabs contributed practically nothing to the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, and here they were the greatest benefactors. And the reason the reason that Palestine was set aside for the Jewish people was because of the historical connection, which went back 3,800 years to the time of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was because of the historical connection that Palestine was allotted to the Jewish people. I mean, it made sense, but there was no Arab connection to Palestine.
To speak in headlines, it is the San Remo Conference of 1920, which are the focus point here of the sovereignty for the Jewish people to the land.
Yes,
in many ways.
Yes, this is my thesis. It's the thesis that I formulated in my book, The Legal Foundation and Borders of Israel and International Law. This is the thesis that I formulated, that sovereignty was devolved or vested with the Jewish people from the time the Balfour Declaration was adopted on April 24, 1920 at the San Remo Peace Conference. And the reason I say that is because at the San Remo Peace Conference, Britain was required not only to use their best endeavors, which was the Balfour Declaration of 1917, but rather to put into effect the Balfour Declaration. The British obligation changed from one of permissiveness to promising to use their best endeavors to one that they had to have the result and an obligation of specific performance. Now, the Balfour Declaration was combined with Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations. The two together formed sovereignty over Palestine, and that was given to the Jewish people, the Uri sovereignty. Now, it was a great point of contention during the whole mandate period who had sovereignty over a mandated territory. The question was actually never answered during this time period. No one knew the answer. It's obvious now, with the passage of time, that the mandatory did not have sovereignty because they had to implement the terms of the mandate, and they were subject to the terms of the mandate. It states specifically in Article 1 of the mandate that they have the administration and power of legislation, but they must conform to the terms of the mandate. They couldn't pass any laws that were inconsistent with the mandate. So they didn't have, for instance, Britain could not have abolished the Jewish national home. They didn't have the right to do that under the terms of the mandate. The same thing goes for the League of Nations Council. The Council of the League of Nations had a function to supervise the observance of the mandate by the mandatory power. The Council, which was aided by the Permanent Mandates Commission, they went and their function was to supervise whether the mandatory power was fulfilling its obligations. And actually, as we know, they came to the conclusion that Britain did not do that. So the two, as I said, the two things together resulted in Jewish sovereignty, because neither the mandatory power Britain nor the League of Nations had sovereignty. Now, sovereignty basically is who has supreme authority, who can dispose of the land. Who was it? It was the a coalition of principal Allied powers, the victors of World War I, who fought against the Central Powers. The principal Allied powers, as I mentioned earlier, were Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. The Central Powers were Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Bulgaria, joined by Turkey. And the principal Allied powers defeated the Central Powers, and they decided who would get what. And that was done at the Paris Peace Conference. They made the distribution of the Ottoman territories, and it was they who originally had sovereignty. Now, I'm not making this up. This was actually inserted in Article 132 of the Treaty of Sèvres. It says so specifically there, that sovereignty was vested in the beginning. Once the Ottoman Empire was conquered, sovereignty passed to the principal Allied powers. They, in turn, decided who would get what. And they passed the sovereignty to the Jewish people over Palestine. Mm-hmm. I call it the two-step approach, or the two-tier procedure. In the first instance, sovereignty passed from Ottoman Turkey to the principal Allied powers as a collective body. And at the San Remo Peace Conference, that sovereignty was then devolved to each of the national beneficiaries of the mandates. There were three categories of mandates, A, B, and C. Palestine was among the Class A mandates, together with Iraq and Syria.
Yeah.
And this was done at the San Remo Peace Conference.
Exactly. Today, it's said that the settlements, the Jewish presence in Judea, Samaria, the so-called West Bank, is the obstacle to peace and the main problem for the region. Yes. To create peace. Yes. But actually what you say is that Israel has absolute right, the Jewish people has absolute right to stay and live in this area.
Yes, and I say that...
Regarding international law.
Yes, regarding international law, and anyone who's familiar with the political, diplomatic, and legal history of the period wouldn't deny that. The whole problem is that people who claim that settlements are illegal simply have erased the history, the diplomatic and legal history of the entire period up to 1947, 48, and some of them go right up to 67. Of course, if you start from 1967, and if you assume that Jordan was the sovereign, then you can say that the settlements are legal, but you can't start from that basis. The departure point is not 1967. It should get into the heads of these people that you got to start from the right departure point. The right departure point is the years 1915 to 1925, when all the documents of international law were formulated and the Ottoman Empire was divided and territories allotted to different national beneficiaries. You don't start from the wrong departure point. If you don't start from the United Nations General Assembly resolution of November 29, 1947. And certainly you don't start from the Six-Day War of June 5, 1967. Look, in 1920, a boundary convention was concluded between Great Britain and France. They spent the whole year, most of 1920, negotiating that boundary convention. It was called the Franco-British Boundary Convention of December 23, 1920, and was signed by the French Prime Minister at the time, Georges Legues, and the British ambassador to Paris. And in that boundary convention, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza were specifically included within the Jewish national home, within Palestine. The two were one and the same thing. And this was never changed. Judea, Samaria, and Gaza were Jewish designated land, both by Britain and France. They have forgotten this. This is absolutely terrible that people who have, that nations that have that have agreed among themselves that the Jews would have Palestine and can settle throughout the land, including Judea and Samaria, now deny that they ever did that. That is terrible. It goes against previous agreements. Now, in international law, there's such a thing as estoppel. That is, you can't deny something that you previously accepted and agreed to. Both Britain and France and all the nations who were members of the League of Nations in 1922, those were 52 nations who were members in 1922, plus the United States was not a member, but they signed a separate treaty. They recognized that Palestine was to be the Jewish national home, which meant that settlement could take place anywhere in the Jewish national home. I mean, that's what Jewish national home meant.
Why is that so few politicians, or hardly anyone, is referring to the San Remo Conference, to these events all the time, that they were creating international law?
Yes, because the quick answer to that question is this. The minutes of the San Remo Peace Conference, or what's called in French the Procès-verbaux, the minutes, they were not published until 1958. So that very few people actually became aware of what the San Remo Peace Conference actually agreed to. They simply did not know, or they didn't care to know, that the Jews were given the rights over all of Palestine. Unfortunately, in 1920, all that was told about the San Remo Peace Conference was that mandates were issued. One mandate to Great Britain for Palestine, one mandate to Great Britain for Mesopotamia, that later changed its name to Iraq, and one mandate to Syria that subsequently divided it into Syria and Lebanon. So that's all that was known about the San Remo Peace Conference. It wasn't until they actually published the minutes. To this very day, it's still not too well known. I started to work on this question in the 1980s. I made the first mention of it in 1989 in an article in the Jewish Press, and the person for whom I worked as legal advisor on Eretz Israel under international law, Professor Yuval Neyman, he was the minister in the Shamir cabinet. He published an article in which he said that the Jewish state owes its existence not to the UN General Assembly resolution of 1947, but to the San Remo resolution, a term that I more or less coined to indicate the entire agreement, not merely the granting of the mandates, but the entire agreement. I started writing about this. I wrote several articles that appeared in the Hebrew journal Natif in the 1990s. That I put forth this thesis in my book, and it's the first chapter of my book, and it's the most important chapter.
Okay, thank you for coming to this program, Howard Grief.
Thank you for the opportunity you're giving me to explain Israel's ironclad case to the people of Norway. I'm honored to be here.